Again, if you need to have more information regarding the program, we are encouraging you to go to the website of Restore EU, restore.eu, to find more details about the program. We are really pleased to welcome our afternoon keynote speaker, Emmanuel DELANNOY. I would kindly ask Eduardo BLANCO, our member from France, to introduce Mr. DELANNOY. Once again, Eduardo, thanks for working so hard for organizing the event that once was scheduled to be in Paris, so we should have been in Paris today. There will be other opportunities, but it's very good to have all of you here connected online today. So Eduardo from CBios or CBios, I don't know always how to pronounce this name, but anyway, I let you introduce yourself and Emmanuel DELANNOY, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Carlo. I'm glad to be here today. So I'm Eduardo BLANCO from CBios in French, but maybe CBios in English. I will be the moderator for this section. So CBios, just for short presentation, is a non-profit organization that works with biomimicry here in France to catalyze sustainable and regenerative development in several sectors, including architecture and urban design. So I'll be the moderator for this section with Emmanuel DELANNOY, that I'm glad to invite to join us. Emmanuel is an entrepreneur, lecturer, and author. He contributed to the creation of the French Biodiversity Agency here in France, and now he's the co-founder of Pekaia, that's a consulting firm dedicated to helping corporations and governments to implement ecological reinvention of the economy. He's the author of the book Permaeconomy, and today Emmanuel is here to address the regeneration from the economic perspective. He's going to explore how, through biomimicry, nature can be a source of inspiration in this field. Emmanuel, I invite you to share your screen. You can start your presentation. For the other attendees, I remember that you can send your questions through the questions and answers button. And at the end of the presentation, we are going to try to answer it. Thank you very much. Emmanuel, may remember to turn on your microphone. Probably it's off.
Yeah, that should be better this way. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Eduardo, and thank you everyone here for your welcome. I would like to introduce a modest contribution to the theory of regenerative economy in the concept of permaeconomics, or permaeconomy, as you said it, depending in English or in French. The idea is to go beyond what we know about permaculture, permaculture being permanent agriculture, being a sustainable agriculture, sustainable model of agricultural production. But beyond that, permaculture is also a regenerative agriculture. The idea is to work with the ecosystem and not against the ecosystem, and the idea is to regenerate the soil, globally the diversity of the ecosystem and its capacity to contribute to the flow of nutrients, to the flow of water, and to the development of life in the agricultural system. But in the idea of the founder of permaculture, permaculture was a way to think, design, manage sustainable, human design, sustainable production system. And if you think about that definition, it can go well beyond agriculture, and of course involve all the economics, all the means of production we can organize and design today, including also cities, territory management, and so on. So this is basically the idea. So it relies on new business models, a new way to create value, and also a new ethics of business for a changing world that we all know today. So if we can go a little bit further, basically, what's important to understand is that every system in the universe needs these three keywords, relies on these three keywords, thermodynamics, because every systems use energy and dissipate energy. We are all dissipator of energy, and every human organization is a dissipator of energy. We are all contributing to the complexity of the whole system, which is not a bad thing. We often have a tendency to associate complexity with difficulty, which is not necessarily the case. I would like to insist on the fact that without complexity in this world, in this universe, there won't be any life possible on the Earth. Why? Because with complexity, you have emergence, which is a property of complex system, which allows basically 2 + 2 = 5 or more, meaning that the system is more than the sum of its parties. If you think about diversity, if you think about complexity, what's better to start with than the living system? What we have here is the global phylogenetic tree of all living organisms today on this Earth. You know, you find something maybe you know in the Metazoa group between 2 p.m. in this quadrant. You will find notamment Pan troglodytes, the chimpanzee. You will find Homo sapiens, Mus musculus, the mouse, and so on. But you know, diversity is much more than animals. It's much more than plants. It's much more than fungi and so on. It's also what you can't see, microorganism. And it's also beyond that. What you can't see on the whole graph here, it's the interaction between all these living agents in the ecosystems and in the biosphere. Biodiversity is not a catalog of species. Biodiversity is essentially a matter of interaction and coevolution between all the living species on this planet. So we need diversity, and we need this complexity of living systems to allow to adapt, to evolve, and to constantly change because the conditions themselves are changing. But think about our modern world today. I would like to put it like a joke with this image. Of course, imagine humanity without any diversity at all. Imagine that we were all clones sharing the same appearance, but also the same background, but also the same ideas, mental shapes and so on. We won't be able to innovate. We won't be able to adapt to any incoming event that we can't anticipate. We need, again, biodiversity. But when you think about our industrial systems, when you think about our agriculture, the main mode of this is standardization, normalization, we are trying to push the diversity at the margins of our production system because very often diversity is associated to something that can slow up us, that can be something we have to deal with, but it's not optimal, and so on. Think about conventional agriculture on the hundreds of acres with the same plant on the same genome in each individual plant for acres on acres. So we need to reconcile ourselves with diversity. This is my first statement. The second statement is that we are now facing the scarcity shift. It's not started yesterday, it's many years, maybe decades before. But when you think about what were the conditions of the emergence of the first industrial revolution, maybe 150 years ago, what was abundant was energy, raw materials, natural resources. But what was rare at this epoch was knowledge, information, skills, workforce, all resources associated with human resources and immaterial resources. And all this is now abundant. because we are more on this earth. We are better educated, we have a better access to education, to information. We can cooperate through the internet worldwide today. So we have a great abundance of immaterial resources. But in the same time, we have worked to make these physical resources, fossil resources for most of them, now rare. Basically, our economy has then changed in its main way of functioning. We are still dilapidating rare resources and undervaluating abundant resources, which are information. But if we compare ourselves on our economy with living systems, with biosphere, we can see that biosphere use mainly information. Why? Because we have photosynthesis, which is the corner, the entry point of energy, solar energy in the living system on this planet, and everything depends on photosynthesis. But with thermodynamics, we have a lot of loss. Photosynthesis is only 1 to 2% of output, throughput. So if you consider this, the difference in biosphere is made by information, by DNA, and by circulation of information between living organisms, which structures this whole ecosystem, this interaction between all living organisms in the ecosystem and in the biosphere. So what can we do? Well, we can do like the living systems. We have to invent an economy that will rely mainly on information and will be vastly more efficient on energy and material resources. So that's our goal. But how can we do that? Maybe we need a new compass because we are facing many issues, many crises. We are facing, of course, an ecological crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss, but we are facing also many economic vulnerability and many social issues. So we need to refresh our compass. We cannot think like we used to think in the past, thinking that growth, GDP and so on, will be the only thing we have to focus on. This was the old compass, but it's no longer relevant today. Of course, we all know this. Today, we know this work from Rochstrom and Al from the Stockholm Resilience Center. And we know, of course, about the donut from Kate Raworth. The idea is to find a safe, secure, an equitable space between an ecological ceiling, which is vastly under concern, under damage, climate change, biodiversity loss, land conversion, nitrogen and phosphorus loading, and so on, and a social foundation, meaning that we have to satisfy basic human needs with our economy without damaging anymore the ecological ceiling. But when I say that, it's not enough because it is already damaged. We have growing human and social needs because the population is growing, because many humans on this earth may want to live as we live in Europe, for example, and this is acceptable. But of course, the ecological ceiling is already too much damage. So we have to fix it, we have to repair, and we have to go beyond. So we have maybe to think like someone who designed an agricultural system based on the permaculture principle. We have to restore, we have to welcome diversity, we have to work with nature and not against nature. And that's what we can achieve with permaculture. Because, of course, we are facing crisis. But what is a crisis? Is a crisis something that occurs when you have, for example, a cold, you have some fever, but you wait a few days, and after that you come back to a normal state? It's not the kind of crisis we are living. We are living a kind of crisis that is really a transformation of the whole biosphere system. And we are the cause of this global transformation. Here you can see the 5 previous global extinction crises that occurred during the geological times. The last one was 65 million years ago. The dinosaurs disappeared, among others. But then after that, the biosphere started again with biodiversity, with new species appearing and so on. And we have to think that this kind of crisis will be a new state of the world. And in the coming years, coming decades, coming centuries, things will be pretty much different than all we knew before. So in this kind of time, maybe we have to do like living systems, we have to adapt, of course, but adaptation is a kind of strategy to adapt ourselves maybe more quickly by reusing things, infrastructures, skills that we already have, but reusing them in a very much different context and in a very much different goal, just like the feathers of some dinosaurs, which were only there to regulate the temperature, the inner temperature of the animals. They transformed themselves into feathers for birds, the descendant of dinosaurs, that can allow birds to fly. It's the same structure, but the form, the shape has evolved. And it's a principle of adaptation because the function has drastically changed between the old form and the new form. We can think about adaptation for our economy, for our product, for our infrastructure. We can think, how will they be useful? How can we use them differently in the new context to allow us to speed up the transformation process we need for our global economy? If you think about circular economy, this is a kind of example I will develop because there is a link, of course, with adaptation. We very often think about recycling, but circular economy is much more than recycling. Circular economy is much more a way to think about value, to think about how we can generate, capture, and share the value among the value chain. If you think in this way, life cycle for any kind of product or service, recycling is a long loop that needs a lot of infrastructure, treatment, energy, but very few, if I can, if you allow me this expression, very few intelligent or creativity. It's not very innovating. But if you think in terms of business model, then you can reassemble, we can remanufacture the goods that are used, but most of the parts are still in a very good condition. We can think about reuse the same object, of course, or share the same object to increase the intensity of use of the same object. For example, a car, a privately owned car today is parked in the street 95% of the time, so it doesn't create any value during all that time. So we need to intensify the way we create value with the existing object we have. And of course, if you close the loop at the shortest level, you concentrate on customers' need and you address it individually in its own context. And that's the principle of servitization, which is by many ways opposed to the concept of industrialization, because industrialization is a way of mass producing with a lot of standardization, with a lot of normalization, so very few diversity, because the idea is to produce mass of goods at a very low level of cost for any good produced. But it doesn't allow to address individual needs in a very relevant way. So servitization is a kind of answer, and it's a way to answer, the idea of scarcity shift, as I talked a few minutes ago before. It will mobilize much more information, many more interaction between the customer, the supplier, on the producing ecosystem of the supplier, meaning that they all have to cooperate a lot, they all have to share information. So this will be much more intensive in information and much less intensive in energy and resources. And basically, the idea to understand is the shorter the loop is in circular economy, the most intensive it is in information, and the most efficient it is in the use of energy on raw materials. If you think also about what we know, what we have all heard about sustainable development, is that these three spheres, which are interconnected, of course, but you can get basically the idea that they can all live their own lives. It's different systems. No, it's not different systems at all. It's imbricked systems, one being inside another one. And finally, the anthroposphere is a subsystem of the biosphere because we are living organisms and we need to interact with the rest of the biosphere. And the economy is a subsystem of anthroposphere because it is the way we organize ourselves to produce and distribute wealth and value. And in this draw, I have replaced the economics subsystem by a permaeconomics subsystem with basically two key ideas. The first is that we need a system that is balanced. So we need to give to the anthroposphere, to society, as much as we take. And we need to give to the biosphere as much as we take for it. The idea is to have, like in permaculture, a self-sustained economic systems, meaning an economics that can manage and produce its own condition of future value creation. It's the autopoiesis of economy, if you prefer. On how does it work? It works with the pillar, the basic concept of circular economy. You need to master the flow of materials and energy through eco-design, through industrial symbiosis, and so on. And you need to invent new business models to create value and to share value with cooperative value centers business models, with functional economy, with servitization. And all this is based, of course, on biomimicry, because the idea is to be relevant and compatible with life principles and to take our inspiration in the living systems. So basically, we need an economy that will do exactly as a farmer which operates in permaculture do. What does a farmer in permaculture? It doesn't nurture the plant. It doesn't give water or give nutrient to the plant. It works with the soil, and his obsession, if I can say, his obsession is to make the soil more rich in biodiversity and more apt to store energy through carbon, to phosphorus, to nitrogen, more apt to store water. And in this way, he intends to prepare future harvest as much as is preparing the current year harvest. So the idea is to conciliate future wealth creation with today's wealth creation. And in a way, it is a kind of reformulation on a kind of answer to the definition of sustainable development, like it was stated in the Brundtland report. You know, this model of development that doesn't alter the capacity of future generation to create, to satisfy their needs. The idea is to increase the capacity of future generation to satisfy their basic needs, but in the same time to satisfy our needs today. But it's kind of reversing the proposition in this way, because we think about the future, we work with the soil, we develop the capacity of the soil, and in permaeconomics, we work with the biosphere and we work with the society, developing the capacity of biosphere and society to create value today and to create future wealth. Basically, permaeconomy, or permaeconomics in English, is the idea of applying the principles on the ethics of permaculture to the design and to the management of any human production systems. The ethics is very basic. We need to care for people. This is the donut of Kate Roroff, of course. But in the same time, we need to care for the earth, because if we are not able to care for the earth today, we will not able to care for people tomorrow. And it's immediately degrading. We can see it today. And we need to fair share the value created, the resources, and the perspective, I would say, again. And fair sharing, for me, goes beyond the fair sharing among humans, because it's a matter of sharing space and resources with the rest of the living world, with biodiversity at large, and not only humans. And you can see 12 management principles that I will not have time to develop here, of course, but it's basically a kind of reformulation of life principle and also sustainable principles. So if we stick to this principle, we can achieve the design of very sustainable production systems in the economy. But it's a lot based on, again, information, cooperation, and interaction between all the agents of the society today. So these are another chart with all these principles. Maybe if you have time during the question Q&A, we can give some example. But basically, what permaeconomics invites us to do is to think about a new ethics for a complex world. It's about living together, but not, again, only among humans, with the rest of the living world. It's about, again, learning to co-evolve, and maybe not mastering everything on this planet, on this biosphere. It's about sharing space on resources. It's about going from interaction, which is rather a passive world, to cooperation, which is a much more proactive world, meaning that there is an intention on the project behind cooperation. So globally, we will go from interdependence, because we are all interdependent today, but interdependence, we can take it as a passive way. Against, we are all in the same boat, and if the boat sinks, we all sink with the boat. No, it's not the idea. The idea is to go from interdependence to solidarity. We act together to preserve our boat or our planet, to live better tomorrow. This will invite us to think maybe beyond the idea that was in the mind of the thinkers of modernity, beyond the idea that is that relies behind Neolithics. You know, when we are started to work like masters and owners of nature, but are we really that? No, we can see that we don't master nature. It would be very arrogant to think that we have owners of nature. And if we try to dominate nature, the answers of nature are not very positive, including for our own living conditions. So the idea is to go beyond domination and to invent a new post-Neolithic ethics for the relation of human and non-humans in this planet. The idea is to go to do like the surfer, you can see it. What does the surfer? The surfer doesn't dominate the wave. He doesn't master the wave. He doesn't try. He doesn't even think about trying to master or control the wave. But he uses the power, the energy of the wave to move with it. What the surfer masters, it's not the wave. It's the skills and the technology that he used to interact with the wave. And we have to think maybe about a new relation with our technologies and with the living systems. We have tried to develop technology to master and to dominate the living systems, the biosphere. Globally, we can see today we're not going to it. We are facing failure on very difficult times if we keep on that track. But what we can think is mastering or remastering our skills and technology to learn to better and more productively and more positively interact with nature, with non-human living on this planet. And basically the key word, the idea behind that is prosperity. Prosperity, as it stands in Old Greek, is two words, is pero, which means jump, and pro, forward. Jumping forward, prosperity, it's not only a matter of wealth, of financial resources, of profitability or growth. It's a way of thinking our relation with future. What we can see is that we are globally a society with a lot of resources, with a lot of technology available right now today. But we are not in a situation of having confidence in future. We are scared globally of future. We don't trust ourselves. We don't trust each other. And the idea behind prosperity, and I think this is a goal that we should all share when we think about regenerative economy, is to restore confidence, is to restore our capacity to work together to prepare a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. It was really insightful. We had already some very interesting comments in the chat, like congratulating you for the analogy with the surface. It's really nice. And we have two questions. One question from Carlo that I'll tell you at first. The question is, it would be much easier to address these global issues if people would understand that biosphere is a finite system. Why is this concept so difficult to understand in your point of view, that biosphere is finite?
Well, I think this is the key, because if we can understand the actual nature of biosphere, without any joke in the use of the two words in the same sentence, we could understand that it's not something that you can master, but it's something that we can rely on for our own resilience, for our own capacity of adaptation. Again, it's a matter of ethics, it's a matter of philosophy, it's a matter of anthropology, it's a matter of culture, the way we see ourselves in the biosphere. Basically, the Occidental mindset is based on fear of nature. We are scared of things we don't really understand, we don't really know. The idea is to be more agile, to be more confident in the way we can interact with biosphere, in the way we can globally interact with complex systems, with things we don't master, with things we don't completely know, and we will never completely know and understand biosphere. This is something we have to understand. But I often, beyond the surfer, I often use another image, which is the image of someone cycling in a city. If you cycle in a city, you don't master very much. You don't master what will happen on the road when we cross the next road beyond, when you are passed by a car, when you need to interact with pedestrians and other vehicles and so on. But you don't need to master everything. You interact with reality and it goes fine most of the time, hopefully.
Thank you very much. Another question from Daniel. It's I'm going to read it. Emmanuel, how would you encounter economists who argue that more diversity would make handling all of economy process too inefficient and costly?
Sorry, is the question written? Because I don't really
yes,
understand.
it's in the chat. You can see I'm going to send it directly to you. So it's easier. I'll send it for everyone so everyone can see the question. Again, it's from Daniel.
You mean in the chat, because I don't have it.
Yeah, in the chat you can click in the chat below. Chat. Do you see it?
No, I don't see it. Maybe. Okay, sorry. I was in the Q&A.
Yeah, I just sent the question to everyone. So
how would you encounter economists to argue that more diversity will make handling on the world? Yes, that's another key question, of course. Of course, if you still think with the industrial mindset, diversity make things more difficult to handle, and of course, maybe less efficient or maybe too costly. But if you think about the way the global economy reacted to the COVID-19 crisis, it is very efficient in normal conditions, where the conditions are under control. But it has a very low resilience. So the idea maybe when we are facing changing times, when we are facing many crises at the same time, would be to be a little bit more resilient and maybe a little bit less efficient. But it's also the idea of cooperation behind that, because behind that. If you think of cooperation, of course, there is an initial investment. We have to learn to work together. We have to invent new processes to share information, to exchange goods, and so on processes. But if you go after this initial investment, you are much more efficient and at the same time, much more resilient. And if you take the way the market works with functional economy, with servitization, for example, the way you have global market for energy supply or for city lighting, for example, you have much more cooperation today, but the systems are much more efficient and at the same time, much more profitable. So this is something we have to learn to do. Of course, it's a different way of making economy. But again, if you think in the industrial mindset, what's happening today? There will be always someone in the world that will be less costly than you do. So you will always have competitors that will beat you if you try to fight only on the price indicator. If you try to fight on quality, innovation, servitization, meaning personalization of the interaction, you can win.
Great. Thank you. I believe we have time for one more question. There's one question from Martin that is related to this point that we were discussing, that how to make this mindset shift. So how to change the practice and the mind through education, through demonstration. What do you have in mind regarding this point?
Yeah, it's again, we need everybody. We need, for example, a change in our food quality. If people try to know how their food are grown, they know the producer, they go and buy themselves to the farm, the product they are using, they will learn about how the living system work. They will learn about the season cycle and so on. So we will anchor ourselves a little bit more in biosphere. But we also need a shift in culture. So we need to involve writers, poets, artists, and so on, because it's a global mindset that needs to be changed. Maybe we need to spend more time in nature than we are spending today. And we can see that many cities in Europe, but it's the same everywhere in the world, doesn't have enough parks, green infrastructure, urban farms. We need all these because all these will contribute to the change of this mindset. I much better choose a change in mindset that will be made with new desires, new practice that we can dream of, rather than a change in mindset that will be made because we have to face a major crisis. Of course, the mindset will also change, but it will be a much more human costing process.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I will close this session right now. So if you have more questions, don't hesitate and discussions to go to the Discord channel and also to contact and reach Emmanuel directly. Thank you very much. It was very insightful.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. Thank you.
Scientific missions, what they are, and we run a lot of them during our action. We briefly mentioned at the beginning. We have Jelena Brajkovic, our short-term scientific mission coordinator, right with us online now. And she's introducing, by the way, the award for the best STSM, correct, Jelena?
Sorry, just to unmute myself. Yes, short-term scientific missions at Restore. So I'm going to shortly just introduce the tool, and you will see the overview of STSM done within Restore, and then I will have a small chat with our winner, the best STSM voted by the MC members. So I'm going to share a screen with you for a small presentation. I hope you see it. And so STSMs, or short-term scientific missions, are research visits from one researcher to a host institution where the applicant will perform research activities and advance the objectives of Restore. Preferably, the applicant should be part of active working group of Restore. So the teams and the whole, design of this STSM should fit into the VG goals and what current VG is about. Applicants should find themselves appropriate host, or they can choose from the host that we have each year. Some host institutions they make a call, and you can go there or find yourself appropriate host. And STSMs must be conducted between 5 and 90 days. Although in case if you're an SC, it can be longer than that. So I'm not going to really talk about all the rules that could be applied to STSMs. It is just important that you know if you're applying to this or any other cost action that of course you must belong to some of eligible countries, and your host institution, as you can see on the table, must also fulfill some cost rules that are very clear. Also, when you apply to our editorial committee to be evaluated the STSM application, there are of course main criteria, and the criteria have their own weight, and then we calculate the best. We calculate the best results, and we usually have, of course, more applications than those that we can fund. So it is very important that you give time to planning your short-term scientific mission. STSMs, of course, need to be carried out within one single grant period, and for Restore, the maximum amount is 2,500 euros that could be dedicated to the applicants. For detailed information, of course, you can visit Section 8 of Cost Vademecum. This is a very, very useful tool, in my personal opinion, of the cost. So I think that each researcher, especially young researchers, should use this tool to broaden their horizons and simply change the working environment. And at Restore, we successfully finished exactly 21 STSMs within 3 grant periods, having different focuses in research. And we have far more STSMs planned in the Gp4. As you all can imagine, this pandemic that happened in 2020, of course, postponed some of our planned STSMs, but we all hope that in since 2021 they will be possible to perform. As of course, doing the STSM online isn't something that actually can be done. So we all hope for better in 2021. And of course, you can always visit our website and see more detailed info about STSM. Just a few words about the STSMs done. You were all invited to vote for your, let's say, favorite STSM, and you can see here STSMs conducted in the first grant period. You can see the topics are different, and from the sustainability to the comfort to the design to the biophilic design, and of course life cycle assessment. And STSM coordinator was Mike Bernhard, and we had 4 SC PhD candidates and 2 ITC, which is important to promote these kind of tools in at young people and ITC countries. For Gp2 overview, you can again see the variety of topics that were included. I'm not going to read them all. You can read it yourself if you haven't already done that during the voting. And for the Gp3 overview, you can see there is a slight, of course, shift in focus depending on the VG goals that were currently ongoing. Also, we, as I noticed, the variety was really from the construction and some very practical themes to biophilic design and using fractals for enhancing the restorative indoor environment, which are all very innovative topics that definitely helped restore achieving its goals on innovation. So for the GP4 period, there are 4 planned STSM, which yet didn't happen. One only started and is not yet finished. So these STSMs were not in our voting pool. Coming to the awards, the main criteria that we gave were contribution, of course, to the restore goals, grade of innovation, as I said. Innovation is very important to restore, and of course the effectiveness and, let's say, afterlife of the results. Here you can see the results of voting, where I can say that STSM award goes to Emmanuel Navoni, who is going to say a few words about his STSM. After Navoni, there is Catherine de Wolf with circular economy towards regenerative structural design, Simone Torestin with indoor soundscaping and natural ventilation for restorative buildings, as well as Clarice Leil de Souza, recording regenerative design in action. Going back to Emmanuel, the design of climate adaptive cities and districts, urban climate adaptation into digital practice. So, Emmanuel, I welcome you to this short panel of our conference. And I would please you to say a few words on your STSMs, the motivation, the results, the possible afterlife. So what can we hear from you?
Okay, first of all, thanks so much for the trust. And it's the first time I win a prize since when I was 11. When in Carnival I was wearing like a toothpaste tube. But coming back to the STSM, that was hosted by ATH Future City Singapore. That was lasting, was quite long. It was about 3 months. And it was quite interesting. The idea was to try to understand how regenerative approaches can be supported by data analysis, with also creating model for, let's say, integration of comprehensive way of modeling several layers of importance, from biosphere to let's say more the technosphere, linking perhaps to the previous talk of Emmanuel, by the way, very inspiring talk. And so a set of tools were created perhaps these were related mainly on how to design districts that are somehow relating to, first of all, urban fabric and urban geometry, how that accounts when we talk about regenerative design. The second layer was an energy thinking, how to relate energy uses and production of energy when planning a neighborhood, for instance. And also thinking of the relation between the void and the built. Last but not least, how greenery, nature-based solution can be valued in contemporary design that has regenerative features in it. More in detail, and this is a publication that is coming out soon, we have used this for a topic or axis of investigation to try to understand what type of typologies can be used for Singapore Central Business District, which is an area stolen from the sea. As you know, Singapore is quite dense and there is a lack of land. So the idea has been to reclaim some territory by creating artificial soil. A new model for development are studied. So the idea is to look at perhaps even important sand typology from Europe. And these are assessed according to the frame just exposed. Thank you so much for the support from the cost action, and particularly from Yelena, that has been quite supportive of application and integration and interaction while writing them, as well as providing feedbacks, as well as congratulations to the previous STSM manager that did an excellent work. So thank you so much, Yelena.
Thank you too, Emmanuel. And you can also tell us something about your new planned STSM, which is about to happen hopefully in 2021.
Yeah, this hopefully will happen, as you've mentioned from Palaborin. New Zealand is closing the borders, but we have already set a plan to do a similar study of the one carried in Singapore, but much more related to the input provided by Paula, that relates to a neighborhood in Auckland, where there has been already designed a regenerative neighborhood, and where a serious post-commissioning and a series of metrics were recorded. So the idea now is to work already in several data, try to understand how, what is actually the impact, the recorded register impact of regenerative strategy. So this is quite interesting because it's not about simulating or forecasting something, but it's about measuring how urban design, architecture, and the living of a place can refer to a regenerative model. So hopefully it will happen, but I'll get back to you.
Yes, yes. And tell me, in your experience with STSM, do you see any, how to say, room to improve this tool? What would be your opinion on that, if you have anything, since you have experience, obviously, and could you say something about that?
I think the tool is quite powerful, as the process of applying and being evaluated, it's rather smooth. I guess perhaps the economy can always be reinforced, but overall, I think it's really a powerful tool, and it's a great way to interact across different academic or practice-based entities. So I've no major remarks. Has been really useful. But in general, I would say that this cost action has really boosted, which is actually the role of perhaps cost project. My transition from being 4 or 5 years ago a much younger researcher and teacher. So I think these 4 years has really benefited personally myself. Getting in touch with several outstanding researchers out there. So I would thank Restore in general for this great value.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And have you ever yourself hosted SDSM? No.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Have you ever hosted yourself SDSM?
Sorry, the sound has been a bit low.
Have you ever hosted yourself SDSM?
As a hoster, yeah, I hosted also STSM from Giulia Sonetti came to Copenhagen for 2 or 3 weeks. Now I forgot, and it has been it was a very fruitful collaboration that led also to study of how to implement such strategies in Turin. Also Dario Kotava, who is I can see is attending this conference, was indirectly Dario Kotafava, I'm sorry, I misspelled it. Was also part of the STSM, collecting throughout digital media analysis a series of feedback from the citizenships of Torino regarding some of the regenerative strategies implemented by the City Hall. And it has been as well a very powerful collaboration, which ended up in some of very cited journals.
Okay, thank you, Emmanuel.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you all.
Does anybody have a question? Some more questions about STSM? As I see here in the chat, yes, I think no questions for Emmanuel. Thank you all for your attention on STSMs and the
jump into the fourth work package session during our program. So we've been talking extensively about buildings, but buildings, as a matter of fact, are assembly of building materials more than design strategies and other approaches. So what about on how to keep the technologies regenerative or suitable for regenerative buildings? This is, as you can imagine, a very huge topic. We've been addressing, thanks to the leadership of Roberto Lollini and Wilmer PASUT in the fourth work package that is actually named as Rethinking Technologies. So it's a pleasure to pass the word to Wilmer to introduce this part of the session. Thanks again.
Wilmer, sorry, I was muted.
Perfect.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Carlo, and I mean, congratulations for managing to keep this online conference right on schedule. Really, really impressive. So thank you very much to all of you for being here connected today to talk with us about this key topic for tomorrows of our planet. So I guess that by now you for sure must have a much clearer idea on everything we have done so far on this cost action. In this specific presentation, this specific panel, we are going to talk about the rethinking technology. So the impact and influence of built environment technologies for a regenerative sector. So we're going to talk a bit about the work we did in working group 4. There was this working group led by me and Roberto Lollini. So basically, I like to describe the activities that we perform over more or less 1 year with a set of 5 questions. So we tried to provide an answer to these questions with our work. We try to provide an answer to the question, what is a regenerative environment? So how can you describe a regenerative environment? There is a way that you can measure it. How can you say that an environment is regenerative and another one is not regenerative, or one is more regenerative than another? The second question is it univocal or can have a different nuances? So is it, I mean, we know that our history, our past somehow shapes our perception of today. So this is true also for what concerns our idea of a regenerative environment. So we have a different way to perceive the indoor environment, and our cultural background for sure somehow shape our perception of the indoor environment and of what we consider a good indoor environment. How technology can contribute to achieve a regenerative indoor environment. So in this question and also in the next one, we really dig a bit more on the concept of technology and how the technology can help us to shape the indoor environment. And then what is a good set of solutions for a regenerative indoor environment? I guess this is a key question for designers. You know, you are called to put together a set of solution technology in every design if you're a designer. So which is the best set in considering the condition, the situation, the place where you are, the people that will live inside? So it's not an easy question. We try to answer also to this. Finally, what should be the environmental impact of a regenerative technology? So we know that the technology has an impact on the indoor environment, but the technology itself during the entire life cycle had and is going to have an impact on the environment. And we need to define a way to measure better, assess this impact, and try to take that in consideration also in the selection of the technology for the indoor environment. And we try kind of to summarize anything with this image where really the indoor environment is at the center, but the perception of it is really linked to the users and the people that will be inside. And there is the concept technology has a strong impact on the indoor environment, but at the same time has an impact on the environment. So we need to take this in consideration. So today we have 3 great speakers that led subtasks in this in our working group. First of all will be Lorenza PISTORE. She's a postdoc at the University of Venice, Ca' Foscari. We actually are working together in the same group, and we are doing research on indoor environmental quality and energy consumption in buildings. Second one is Thaleia KONSTANTINOU. She's assistant professor at TU Delft, and she's going more or less to try to answer to the second set of questions, the one about technologies. And then there's Sergio ALTOMONTE. He's a full professor at the UC Louvain. You already saw him this morning talking about in another presentation. Right now is going to talk to you a bit more about how to assess the indoor environment, which are the instruments, the tool that we can use to assess a regenerative indoor environment. Before to move on, I'd like to remember you that we publish a book that is publicly available online. You can download it here. I put the website, the link to directly download it, but you can easily find it in the Restore website. And also I put the link to the working group 4 page where there are listed all the results that we put together. So that being said, I think I need to move on, and I'd like to leave the floor to Lorenza PISTORE. She will be the first speaker, and then she will pass that to Thaleia, and then finally there will be Sergio. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wilmer, for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so you should see it. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here and joining this presentation. My presentation will be about the characterization of a regenerative indoor environment. I will start with a very brief introduction, then I'll move to the topics of our task A, to the steps and the objectives of the work, Thirdly, I propose some outputs from task A, namely the identification of the key performance indicators with their values and thresholds. And finally, I ended up with the connection with my other colleagues and their tasks. So as it's already been said, when we talk about indoor spaces, there is also here the need to strive for a shift from a more conventional approach, which aims merely at reducing the negative impacts, to a more regenerative one, where we want to create a new set of relationships in order to reinforce the state of health of both humans and natural ecosystems. When we talk about the design of regenerative spaces, we really need to embrace a new dimension in which the occupant's well-being is put center stage, and we always take into consideration the impact of the building itself on the health of occupants and users of the building. So within working group 4, our task, which as I said was task A, dealt with the technology-related parameters in order to make an indoor environment regenerative. So the task consists of mainly 3 steps. The first one was about the identification of the main building typologies and the selection of reference typologies with which developing the work. The second step is the identification and the definition, focusing on indoor environmental quality and well-being. And the third step is about the definition of the thresholds and the values for each different key performance indicator. So the first step, as I said, was about the building typologies. Why it is important to talk about the building typologies? Because knowing the function and the activity of a building as well as the occupant's target allow to identify the performance targets to be pursued in the indoor environment of that specific typology. So our very first objective was the creation of a common framework to be used as a global methodology for analyzing indoor spaces in different building typologies. So starting from the typology selected in the first place, then the development of the work was conducted mainly on office buildings for 3 main reasons. The first one is that in office buildings, indoor environmental quality is strictly linked to occupants' health, well-being, but also productivity, motivations, and so forth. Then office buildings, for their intrinsic nature, embrace a full and wide spectrum of environmental aspects to be then in a second place carefully maybe extended also to the other building typologies. And the first reason actually was a very practical one, and it was because we wanted to be in line with the demo cases that were chosen for the working group. So this common framework was made of 5 different steps. Firstly, the characterization of the building itself and of the indoor environment of the building. Then we moved into the search and the research into the current state of art and literature. Finally, we came up with our final list of key performance indicators to end up with their thresholds and values. As I was saying, we were dealing with the office buildings, so buildings used for general office space, professional office, or administrative ones, and obviously the main occupants target were adults. In the second phase, we characterized the indoor environment, trying to point out the potential affected related tasks in the indoor environment. So in the case of offices, as we all know, they could be productivity and attention, cognitive activities and the ability of processing information, writing capability, desk and screen reading, visual and sound privacy, to the extent to psychological attitudes and motivations. Starting from these affected tasks, we pointed out some related environmental aspects, which were indoor air quality, the hygrothermal environment, the visual and acoustic environment, and the human-nature relationship. At this point, for each environmental aspect, we outlined some more specific sub-aspects. For example, here I've put just some of them. For the thermal environment, temperature, humidity, and local discomfort. For the visual environment, the natural and artificial lighting, the glare and color rendering. And for the human nature environment, biophilia nature, the external view, the right to light. And for all of them, we always kept into consideration also the occupant's satisfaction. At this point, we did a huge work looking at the current literature and standards available. So we really went to look at the available parameters for the indoor environment and their thresholds into the available references that are standards, guidelines, but also certifications. At this point, we looked into the available references and to the actual used conventional parameters and values in this huge and sometimes, let me say, also confusing cauldron of references in order to outline our very own list of key performance indicators. At this point, I'd like to stress that our purpose was not to erase or take a step aside from all the huge and important work done from the certifications, the standards, and the guidelines. But actually, our main purpose was merely to put under the spotlight some parameters that, in our vision, are necessary to be addressed for a regenerative indoor environment. So at this point, for each environmental aspect, we chose some peculiar and specific sub-aspects. So for indoor air quality, for example, contaminants and outdoor air, for the visual environment, daylight and circadian rhythms, or for the human nature environment, right to light and connectivity to nature, and so forth. Obviously, for reasons of time, I cannot go through all of them now. At this point, we really had to come up with our list of KPIs, and we wanted to keep in mind, in choosing them, these main goals. We wanted to support a radical shift from merely limiting health-related impacts to a series of newer regenerative performances. KPIs should fully embrace the meanings of health generation and well-being, and finally should be able to demonstrably improve the inhabitants' health. So at this point, for each sub-aspect, we chose 4 key performance indicators. So for the indoor air quality, we chose the formaldehyde and the particulate matters. For the thermal environment, we chose the implementation of the standard ASHRAE 55. For the visual environment, the useful daylight illuminance and the equivalent melanopic lux. For the acoustic environment, the noise criteria, and for the human nature environment, the windows with access to light and the biophilic design. Aside from this, we always kept also the percentage of satisfied people for each area in the indoor environment. As you can see, as you can notice, there are some KPIs that are strictly connected with the objective monitoring of the indoor environment in order to demonstrably improve the occupant's health in indoor spaces. On the other side, the percentage of satisfied people is just related to the subjective feedback of users, because we wanted to really put at the center of our work and of our analysis the occupants, the users, and their health and well-being. At this point, we came up with some thresholds and values for each KPI. Also, in this case, in order to outline and to output the values for our KPIs, we looked into the available references and standards. Our aim was to extrapolate the more tight performative values, which could be really able to uplift the indoor environment. So here, just to sum up the process, I make a zoom with the example of the indoor air quality. So basically, starting from the environmental aspect and the sub-aspects, we looked into the conventional parameters and thresholds into references, standards, and guidelines. And from this, we decided our regenerative KPIs. Then, in order to decide our own values and performances, we looked again into the available literature and references in order to find the most tight and performative values that, in the case of indoor air quality, were given by the World Health Organization and by the ASHRAE standard 62.1. So to sum up, in our task, we dealt with the technology-related parameters in order to make an indoor environment regenerative. We tried to build up a framework to be used in order to characterize and analyze different indoor environments. We looked at the specific affected tasks in the indoor environment, and in order to propose a shift in the indoor environment characterization, we defined a list of key performance indicators and their values and performances. For more information and references about this work, I kindly ask you to refer to our booklet of Working Group 4. At this point, having our list of key performance indicators and the values, we passed these outputs mainly to two tasks of the working group. Task C, which was about building elements and solution technologies for a regenerative indoor environment, and Task E, in which we worked about the monitoring of indoor spaces and the post-occupancy evaluations. So with this slide, I would toss the ball to my colleagues. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'd also like to take the chance to thank Roberto and Wilmer, which were such great working group leaders, to thank my co-chair Emmanuel Enaboni and Martin Brown for their significant and valuable contribution to these tasks. And obviously, I'd like to thank all the inspiring and great colleagues I've met during this great experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorenza. Now is Thaleia's turn, please.
Yes.
Thaleia, when you're ready.
Yes, there you go. So thank you very much, Wilmer and Lorenza, for introducing task C, because of course it relates to introducing task A, because of course it relates with what we did in task C. And so I co-chaired this task together with Francesco Fiorito. And of course, there were other people also that participated in this task. And I will explain a little bit more the method and how we collaborated. So we started with the objective of task C, which was about defining a set of solutions that address the targets that we have. And I think today you have heard a lot about how we want to create and design in a regenerative way. And in the end, it comes down to technology and to the solutions that we apply. In this case, our focus was that we apply in our buildings. And it's also about the input that and the output that we get through that. And of course, how the users experience it. So the question we set off to answer was like, first of all, what do we consider as technological solutions? And the focus then was that it should be technologies that affect the indoor environmental quality, and they are related with both the hardware and software of the buildings. And also, we wanted to find a way to have a long-lasting contribution and support to the designers, because maybe we can come up with one set of solutions that is very good in achieving a regenerative indoor environment, but maybe in the future we have other technologies, or maybe there are other technologies or other set of solutions that are more applicable for another situation. So instead of really trying to find optimal solutions, which is very tricky things to argue, we decided to go towards defining a framework of how of what type of solutions could be used in order to support the designers and practitioners. So we already heard a lot about the regenerative design. Again, I would like to highlight that our focus here was regenerative indoor environment. And what is also important to consider is that regenerative design does not contradict with what we have been doing so far, and the other type of approaches that we want to have in our building, like sustainability, energy efficiency, adaptivity, is more like they need to work together and they contribute to each other rather than contradicting. And I think that's important to understand, especially as a starting point for design. So which technologies do we need to consider? Starting where what Lorenza explained with the Kpis, which includes environmental aspects and then sub-aspects. And then we say, okay, but in order to achieve those aspects, the building needs to perform some functions. And then such functions are, for example, for indoor air quality, remove or absorb pollutants. For a hydrothermal environment, we need to have passive and active technologies to regulate the heat. A visual environment, we need to block light and sun or allow. Prevent the noise for a good acoustic environment, and and related with human nature environment, some functions that are need to be achieved is to allow for all the occupants view and light, and also include natural elements to increase biophilia. And how to do that is basically by the building, and then the building consists of subsystems. So the subsystems are the ones that achieve those functions. And a main thing is the building envelope, because the building envelope is basically what regulates a lot of those functions, and it's responsible for as it is the cell between interior and exterior. And it's also a system, a component that incorporate both passive and active technologies, so it's increasingly important. Moreover, we also need to look at interior elements, because they can also support this function for a regenerative indoor environment. For example, acoustic elements that we're using in our interior or in the partitions, but also by the design and the geometry of the building with the use of atria or solar chimneys. And finally, we should not forget the active system, because they are part of our building design, and they are part of how the building operates. And by active system, we mean HVAC system, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, renewable energy sources, controls, for example, ventilators and how the ventilation strategy works, solar panels for hot water or photovoltaic panels, and control system, including sensors, but also the user interface that controls that. So then from the framework, we go more towards solution sets. So the solution set is basically a combination of different solutions that we included in our framework. And then after creating the framework, as I explained, we started populating that, but compiling technological solution and best practices. And the method to do that was based on literature, but also on the experiences of the course participants and the case studies that were also part of this working group. And yeah, and at this point, I really want to thank everyone that contributed with their experience and knowledge and information. this compilation of solution is not meant to be exhaustive because it can never be, and it can continue being updated. And we actually want to make this platform available to the cost restore website so that also everybody can access it, but also propose additional additions also in the future. So the idea was that this solution can give inspiration, but also ideas and guidelines to the designers that want to practice and to implement those solution sets for a regenerative indoor environment. And that's a link to the draft framework in case you want to have a look already. I will try to go further into explaining and hopefully clarify a little bit the type of solution that we compiled and give some examples what it is. But I would also like to highlight how those examples relate to the different functions. That is, in the end, the starting point for the framework. So starting with the building envelope, so we compiled different type of technologies. One example, and then through this platform, we also want to have the chance to navigate through the different technologies and similarly through the different aspects. For example, if you look for a specific technology to address a specific aspect. One example that we included there was this facade system that was developed actually by Rosa Romano and her colleagues in the University of Florence, who is also a COST participant, and I also hosted here in SDSM, just to highlight how the collaboration works. So this system is basically a double skin facade, and it incorporates, and it's possible to incorporate different type of technologies, such as thermoacoustic insulation or a ceramic honeycomb panel that works for air purification, phase change material, and incorporation of photovoltaic panels. And it's a modular design, so it has a frame, and then different type of layers can be integrated to achieve the different type of functions. And going back to the framework, we can see that, for example, that specific technology is a double skin facade, so it addresses the building envelope and acts as a thermal buffer, but it also has other type of function with air purification, integration of renewable energy sources, integration of a heat exchanger, which is a more active system, and acoustic insulation. A similar compilation we can find for the interior elements, and then if we go further down, we can address other aspects. So this goes down, I mean, that's a print screen apparently. So the technology that we included in the interior elements was, for example, this acoustic panel, which is 3D printed, and through its geometry, it has the possibility to absorb sound. This is an example of a technology developed by my colleagues in TU Delft. That's why I had access to this information and included it there. And in that case, and through it also gives possibilities to be very customized. But looking at the framework, basically this panel belongs to the interior, and it has this one function. But if we look at more best practice example, like this building by Bernice Architekten, then we can see how it's much more complex, of course. And here we have, as a starting point for the design, the light and the visual comfort. So the design allows for all workstation to be naturally illuminated, and also having this atrium and a sunlight redirection system in the atrium, but also a prismatic skylight on the top of the building, which allowed for redirection of light and then provide a more daylight. And going then back to the framework again, we can see that here we have the interior as an interior element, the light redirection, but we also have in the building envelope, in the roof, in the roof and in the facade. We have the atrium, which is an interior element which works for daylight, but it also works for like a solar chimney or for thermal comfort. And it's also important that it allows access to light for more employees. So it also addresses the aspect of human values. And finally, for the active building systems, I just want to highlight one best practice that we included there, which is the Manitoba Hydro building, which has a number of different systems. Of course, it's a very well-designed building, and it provides dynamic responses with automated louvers, for example, preheating of the fresh air in the double skin facade, manually control windows, but also active exposed radiant ceilings for cooling and heating, which also use the energy from the thermal energy. So all this to say that it's not about choosing one aspect to address. It's actually about addressing all different aspects, and the more aspects we are able to address with a solution, the better design we can achieve. And it's really about combining the technologies to achieve different actions and functions in the building. So the purpose of the framework is there to direct and support this discussion, and also as, let's say, a reminder that we need to look at all the aspects, and it's not only about achieving one thing, because the building it's a very complex system, and it also very complex, the aspect that we want to address in order to have a regenerative indoor environment. So just to demonstrate a bit how this framework was being used, so we applied that in the training school of the work group 4, where the designers had the task to propose some regenerative solutions for an existing building. And then we provided the framework and some of the solution, and see how this approach helped their design towards more regenerative solution sets. And I'm not going to go into detail, but I just wanted to demonstrate here that, for example, they apply some of the technologies we proposed, or they even enrich this framework with technologies that they found. This is one example of combination of different measures, where we have, for example, a solar chimney, but also green on the balconies for shading, and for natural elements. Another example with the same assignment on the same framework came up with a completely different solution, where the intervention on the buildings were not so significant, but they mostly focusing in the control of the building and the monitoring and the interface for the users. So again, that to demonstrate that it's not about having one optimal solution or give a very clear direction that this is what needs to be applied all the time, but support the designers and practitioners to address all. Sorry, the lights went off. Sorry, hope you can still see me. I haven't moved for a while. To address different aspects of the complexity that regenerative design has. So to sum up, our goal was to provide solutions to achieve a regenerative indoor environment. It's important to keep in mind that we need to think also about sustainable, multifunctional, and regenerative buildings. It's not the one or the other. They should work all together, those approaches, for a good built environment. And before selecting technical solutions, so the how we're going to do it, is important to understand the why. So what are we trying to achieve with the solution we are applying? And the framework is meant to organize and direct this selection. Designers are the ones that have the chance to really apply the solution for regenerative design. And our goal here is to direct them to more informed decisions. So thank you very much for your attention. I think the next topic on post-occupancy evaluation can say some more things about how those solutions can indeed be assessed of their functionality.
Thanks a lot, Thaleia, for the very interesting presentation. Now the floor goes to Sergio ALTOMONTE.
Yep, I'm here. So it's always good to pass as third. I now have, what, 3 minutes and a half?
No, we are right on time.
That's unbelievable. We're right
time.
on time. It's absolutely perfect. I like that. Okay, so thank you very much to Lorenza. Thank you very much to Thaleia for setting the scene, really, of what was the activities in the context of Working Group 4 and how we can effectively provide a framework to rethink technologies and rethink the way in which we use technologies for a regenerative indoor environment. So subtask, subtask, or something like that, E, that I co-chaired with Gulben Kalis from Izmir, and I had too many contributors to name all of them. I only need to, just want to name Marco Giampaoletti, who did his STSM at the Université Catholique de Louvain with me to contribute to this work. So we're now focusing on how to monitor, how to perform the post-occupancy evaluation of a regenerative environment. I had already mentioned part of this in the presentation I did this morning on health and well-being in buildings, because I actually finished the presentation by saying, of course, if we need to provide the diversity of conditions that can actually enhance the comfort and well-being of people, and then, of course, make sure that we can have a proper balance of energy requirements in buildings, we need to monitor the way in which the building is behaving, and we need to monitor the way in which environmental parameters are affecting the comfort and well-being of people. But of course, one thing is to monitor in terms of measure, the other thing is to be able to analyze and properly interpret all of these results. We now have a huge array of monitoring system that can go from the most advanced instrument to the Apple Watch that keeps monitoring you and keeps telling you, remind to drink or breathe or whatever. But the important thing is try to understand how all of this plethora of information can actually be used in order to offer information that can influence the way in which buildings perform and which buildings operate. So the subject of the task was really to define the various different procedures that we can use in order to conduct post-occupancy evaluation campaigns, and in order to understand and systematize the various methods to analyze the data. In so doing, we essentially look at the protocols to measure building performance data and indoor environmental qualities, and the tools to collect quantitative and qualitative occupant data towards the comfort, well-being, and health. And of course, in the presentation that I did this morning, I already said that the indicators that we may use for the indoor environmental quality for energy performance may effectively be different from what we have in terms of quantitative and qualitative analysis of human comfort, well-being, and health. And in so doing, of course, we base fundamentally on the various key performance indicators provided by subtask A of Working Group 4. We mentioned indoor environmental qualities that we can define as the quality of a building's environment in relation to the health and well-being of those who occupy the space within it. This is a definition given by the US Institute of Occupational Health and Safety that actually tells us that the indoor environmental qualities, the qualities of the indoor environment that we can measure with the instruments, have to be analyzed and interpreted. They cannot be only left as objective data, because they have to be related to the specific and diverse and variable conditions that can enhance the comfort, health, and well-being of people. And of course, we have to look at all of the different categories, as well as the interaction between them, as we said in the presentation as I did in the morning. We have here a visualization given by the CBE occupant survey, indoor environmental quality survey of the Center for the Built Environment at the University of California, Berkeley, which was one of the reference systems that we analyzed, in which various categories are taken into consideration for measuring the satisfaction of occupant, going from appreciation of the general satisfaction with the building and with the workspace to the more detailed categories of acoustic qualities, thermal comfort, lighting, air quality, which are embedded within the umbrella of the conventional indoor environmental qualities categories, but then obviously also elements that have to do more with economics, the interactions within people, and the way in which spaces are organized, so maintenance, office furnishing, and office layout. Why this interest for indoor environmental qualities? We said that already in the presentation in the morning. It's because effectively in buildings, energy represents only 10% of full operating cost. Most of the costs are actually 90% of the costs are related with the salaries of people. So providing the indoor environmental quality conditions that are conducive to the comfort and well-being becomes a primary target for all companies in the case of office buildings, but I would say a primary target for any owner of any building. Of course, there has been plenty of research which has been related to the conditions that are more conducive to, for example, office task performance. And we can refer to the work done at LBNL in the early years 2000, where a measure was done in terms of the temperature or the air ventilation rate that was conducive to a certain task performance. However, regardless of the validity and the enormous interest of this research, of course, we cannot assure that buildings have a constant temperature throughout all the day, because that would not translate into a constant task performance. We have seen in the presentation of the morning that the circadian cycle of people actually implies that a diversity of environmental exposure can support a comfort and well-being. So obviously, the indoor environmental qualities that we try to achieve in our buildings have to respond to those variable needs of people. And actually, we can say that in buildings, there's nothing that is really about static. Air temperature keeps on fluctuating, surface temperature keeps on fluctuating by, for example, the different exposure to solar radiation. Air infiltration rate is obviously strongly dependent on ventilation strategies and on wind pressure from outside, while the conditions of lighting, discomfort, glare, and solar radiation obviously change based on time of the day, on weather conditions, on latitude, on location of the occupants. So this variability is really something that we have to take into account, and yet our standards seem to go in the opposite direction. Our standards seem to go towards the neutralization of individual differences in order to provide that mean and median satisfaction that really at the end may effectively don't satisfy anybody. And this is actually the conditions that we often see inside buildings where the standard average user actually doesn't exist. So a mean median situation that is kept by the building system is effectively not satisfying the need of anybody in the building. On the other hand, the lack of a recognition of the individual variability of people also implies that the performance gap that is typical of office building is due to the fact that we cannot predict what conditions people will require in order to guarantee their comfort and well-being, and we cannot predict the responses that they will take in order to achieve, maintain, or restore their comfort and well-being by their adaptive actions. This means that we have to have a much more granular measuring of indoor conditions, which is coupled with a better understanding of what people effectively require and what their perception is, in order to make sure that we can link this perception and satisfaction in buildings with the impact of their behaviors in terms of building performance. And we can do so in order to improve the process, the functional performance, and the technical performance of building throughout their life cycle. So essentially, within this task, what we try to systematize is really the various different components that a post-occupancy evaluation campaign should do, which should not be just about looking at the operational performance of people, of buildings, but rather to link this operational performance with the IQ qualities that can be measured inside building and with the satisfaction that occupants express with a number of different parameters. We can go even beyond that because we've seen in the morning that the satisfaction does not necessarily correspond with the parameters required for comfort and well-being. So monitoring can actually also look at collecting indicators or proxies that can tell us about the situations that will be conducive to the comfort and well-being of people. In so doing, we can use various different tools that are dependent on the location of the building, or the building type, and the nature of the problem. And normally these methods actually can be divided in three great families. The cross-sectional surveys, so the transversal environmental satisfaction survey, the right now survey, which may be done at the same time and point in which measurements are taken, and then longitudinal studies that continuously record an appreciation of from the occupants of the situations that we have inside buildings. So we have here some example of a conventional thermal comfort survey delivered, for example, online, of a right now survey that people will fill in while measurements are taken, or the longitudinal survey that pops up on a phone in order for people to give their appreciation of their conditions. Obviously, there are various systems, and in the booklet that Wilmer has shown at the beginning of this presentation, we are presenting tools such as the CBE occupant survey or the BOSA Samba system developed in Australia. And obviously, these are systems that obviously can tell us how the different nuances of post-occupancy evaluation can be integrated in our buildings. And this integration in our buildings is also responsibility for what we do today. We have seen it, for example, with the pandemic and the COVID, the importance of monitoring people. Of course, we cannot test every occupant of every building every day, but maybe we can put in place some monitoring in which, for example, as in this example of the University of Oregon, air is measured every day from each floor so that risks can be emphasized if there is any pathogen that is recognized in the exhaust air, and then a campaign of testing can be put in place. And then, of course, this will have to be related with the way in which the data are presented in order to make sure that occupant satisfaction that could be presented in charts such as this, emphasizing the mean and the median, is then effectively combined with what the occupants have provided as responses in terms, for example, of appreciation survey. So for concluding, measuring at the same time quantitative and qualitative analysis quantitative and quantitative data is important in order to provide a clear direction in which the analysis of building and occupant data is done. And in so doing, combining data that is collected by measuring instruments with the opinion given by people in surveys or in focus studies becomes particularly important. The sort of lesson that should be learned and the message that we want to sort of send with this is that, as I said in the presentation of the morning, buildings do not have to provide static conditions for people. People are highly dynamic. Humans are an outdoor species. We evolved in order to stay outside, in order to be exposed to a variety of environmental conditions. And this is what we have to provide inside buildings in order to enhance, on the one hand, energy performance, but also in order to enhance the comfort and well-being of people. We have to avoid situations in which buildings aim and target for a neutral condition because this is really environmental boredom, and there's nothing healthy about environmental boredom. So we have to promote a paradigm shift in how we think about buildings, making sure that monitoring and adjusting the conditions of building can effectively celebrate the dynamic interactions between humans and the environmental factors that characterize our environment. Thank you very much for this.
Thanks a lot, Sergio. So right now, if there are some questions, we are ready to take them and forward them to our speakers. So there is
actually the question. Sorry, please.
There's a first question. Thanks, Work Group 4, for the lecture. I would like to ask you, compared to the last year lectures, is there any research that you have been looking at regarding indoor environmental quality and COVID measures and ventilation devices in buildings like residential and offices? I don't know if there is someone of you that want to answer to the questions.
Well, go, Lorenza. Go ahead. You go first.
Lorenza, and then Sergio, please.
Well, for sure, there are the standards and guidelines that have been written and the output from the main HVAC institutions like Riva, ASHRAE, and well, in Italian we have ICAR, for example, but at European level there is Riva and ASHRAE for the US that I think right after, like in April or May, have delivered some standards and guidelines in that direction. Regarding those, I would say that actually we're very specific to that particular season and time of the year. So as far as I've read in those guidelines, they rely a lot, for example, on natural ventilation, opening windows, which maybe it's not the point now that we are actually in full winter time. Or yes, they also give recommendations about the ventilation rate inside buildings. The problem is that, as you know, for example, in Italy, one big problem is that a lot of buildings do not have actually a mechanical ventilation system. So I think that the issue you raised is actually very up to date, and I think that one problem is that still we do not have a lot of data and measurements up to now inside buildings about these topics.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Lorenza. And then now I'd like to give the floor to Sergio to answer the question. And I think also, Sergio, you are the target for the next question, so you can answer both. Yeah. The next question is, thank you for your presentation. Could you add more information about how can we monitor COVID and more information about focus group methodology? Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, the COVID is an interesting thing. Is an interesting thing because as we prepare for the next phase, which is the rolling out of vaccinations, we'll need to go back to the buildings, hopefully. I mean, this is what we all hope for. But we want to do it in a way that makes us feel safe. So how do we monitor people? We cannot monitor everybody. Large-scale testing is clearly not necessarily a solution. Of course, we can do the quick impromptu testing, but we know that the level of reliability is relative and has yet to be fully ascertained. One way is what I shown in the presentation. There was a proposal from the University of Oregon where, for example, in high-rise buildings, you can test the exhaust air from the ventilation system if the building is mechanically ventilated, which is the case for most high-rise buildings, so that you can detect an eventual presence of pathogens, which may be COVID, maybe something else, you never know. And then you could use that in order to isolate people, or in order to identify people that may need to be isolated, so to reduce drastically the number of people that have to be tested. Another interesting proposal that I had seen, but I haven't actually seen much information about it, is to test gray waters to see whether there is any presence of pathogens in gray waters, although this, of course, will need to be done at a building scale more than a floor scale. There are other interesting things that could be done in terms of monitoring, but of course, then we have to see how much this is feasible with the current GDPR and data protection. So you could measure, of course, people's temperature. The thermal scanner, we've seen it in every airport around the world. You can see people's presence. So essentially, what we have now, I don't know if you use the apps that will tell you if you have got any close encounter in the last 14 days. You can actually use that with Wi-Fi networks. So you can locate people on floors, and then you can see whether there are instances of people, congregation of people, whether they're getting too close, whether you have a strong concentration of people in a room, and then you can test the exhaust air from there. So there are various things that you can do. Of course, it depends on how granular you want to be with your data monitoring, and obviously how much people will be happy to give up a little bit of their privacy in order to provide the data that can be treated. The second question, I'll try to be much quicker. Wilmer, I apologize for my long responses. For focus groups, it really depends on what is the aim of the focus groups. There are many different ways in which you can conduct qualitative studies, in which you can get information from people elaborating on some key specific concepts. Very often, your qualitative studies may be done either at the very start of a post-occupancy campaign in order to really get an understanding of where the problems could be and where you should focus in terms of your research, or they could be done to interpret some data that come out of the quantitative analysis. And in this case, you can formulate a number of methodologies, semi-structured interviews, focus groups. So obviously, it is up to the definition of the problem to define what methodology will suit better to better understand the nature of the problem and obviously provide the solutions, which is the reason why we do these campaigns in the first place.
Thanks a lot, Sergio, for your answer. Now let's move to the next question. Next question, I think the best person to answer that is Thaleia. So next question is, how can we use old buildings that are very old and not up to date with today's regenerative design instead of demolition?
Yes, that's a very big challenge in our built environment, as we all know, because most buildings are already there. So I think that's definitely possible. So, of course, demolition is happening in the built environment because some things reach the end of their life cycle. But in a lot of cases, we can upgrade the existing buildings. And in the framework, a lot of the technologies can be very well integrated in existing buildings as well. Maybe not necessarily things that really change the geometry, or to some extent even that. But improving the material we use, improving the HVAC system. So I don't think having an old and not up-to-date building should be necessarily a no-go. Quite the contrary. There are some limitations compared to new building, but there are really a lot of things to do. It cannot be one universal answer because it really depends on the specifics and what exactly we need to do. But I also, just to refer to the training school, the designers there applied solution for an existing building. So they did not start designing from scratch and change the geometry and design and change the orientation. But in a given framework with the limitation that an existing building might have, there are still many things you can do towards a regenerative indoor environment. And I would like to refer you to the framework to get some ideas about it, or even propose additional ones.
Thanks, Thaleia. So from the expert, there is actually a very interesting question for Sergio. Is thinking of the implication of designing buildings for neutrality versus designing for thermal and visual variability. Should we look back at older design concepts? Sergio, this question is for you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you, Emmanuel. Absolutely. I think that we have gone through about 30 years of research and application and development of standards in which we have considered that in order to provide the optimal inverted commas conditions for buildings, the best way was to manage building in order for it to have a constant temperature, a constant humidity, a constant level of illumination on the working plane that could satisfy the 80% of people, that could satisfy the majority of people, aiming for a mean median response. In so doing, however, we have forgotten that people are different. People are different from each other, so there is intra-individual variability, and people are different from themselves. So my response to thermal and thermohygrometric environment in the morning is actually different to what I have in the afternoon because my metabolism has changed. Same thing about the lighting, as I said in the presentation of the morning, the exposure to direct illuminance at the eye, especially with a blue shifted light, is particularly important in the early hours of the day in order to activate your circadian cycle. So essentially, aiming for a building that is more dynamic, aiming for a variability of environmental exposure should actually be the target in the way in which we manage the functioning of our buildings, which will end up also by likely and hopefully increasing the dead band. So increasing the band in which the system actually doesn't have to do anything. The system has to actually leave the building decay from one phase to the other, and then with a pulse, bringing it back to certain conditions at a certain time. Of course, we have plenty of research that is needed in order to understand exactly how that could happen and how big that band could be, depending on the conditions, depending on the task, depending on the characteristic of people. But certainly, looking back at how the building of the past were designed, and how the relation between the inside and outside of the building of the past were designed is definitely a clear direction. And as I said this morning, higher energy efficiency would not necessarily mean lower costs.
And maybe just quickly to add something to that, sure. I think that's a good point. And looking back at older design concepts, maybe even at vernacular architecture, is definitely something that designers should do. And that's why I also highlighted that designing for regenerative indoor environment, it's not competing or it's not necessarily different than designing with passive measures, bioclimatic measures for energy efficiency and so on. So I think that's a good point that was brought up, and of course, it's something we should look at and not forget.
Thanks.
But
Please, Lorenza.
There is this study of Leo, Dudira, and Dalla where there is this nice expression where they say that this search for the ideal in buildings of the last decades has made us become fuss about buildings. It's very explicative, I think.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot for this very interesting discussion. Thanks to all of you who joined today's conversation and attend.
And we're still on time.
And we are perfectly on time, guys.
Yes,
So please, Carlo.
Sergio is always so proud of this. But anyway, compliments and congratulations for being on time and also for this very interesting session. Clearly, it was so difficult to focus on a specific topic within this so huge set of topics, but definitely the indoor environmental quality is maybe the most urgent issue right now. So very well done. So